let's talk about some Latinx books. So as you guys know, the Latinx Book Bingo Readathon has been going on for the past 2 weeks now, and it started on September 15th. So that's when I started to kind of go through some of the Latinx books that I have on my TBR, on my shelves, and I got through 4 of them this month, which I'm really, really proud of myself because I didn't read anything before September 15th. So basically from September 1st to September 15th, I read basically nothing, which isn't horrible, and I don't want to beat myself up over it, especially since I totally got stuff done, you know, in the last 2 weeks of the month. But I was a little disappointed in myself because I had so many books I wanted to read before the readathon started, and I did actually like start a lot of those books. I just didn't like follow through with any of them. But thankfully we did follow through with 4 of the books that were actually not on my TBR, but were books that I wanted to read anyway. So the first book that I read this month was actually an audiobook, and I absolutely loved it. I read it in one day, and it basically kickstarted my love of reading again. It like got me out of a slump, and that was Dark and Deepest Red by Anna Marie McLemore, and I gave that book a 5 out of 5 stars. I was so surprised by this book because I just kind of picked it up one day on a whim. I was looking through Scribd, and I'm like, I need something short to listen to, and it was about like an 8 or 9 hour audiobook, and I was like, perfect. I can read this in the morning. It'll, you know, it'll be done really fast. I read at a 2x speed. It's great. So I started playing it, and I was doing the dishes, I was cleaning up. I fell in love with this story so much, and there are so many elements that I really love in this story. So basically this follows the fairy tale of the Red Shoes and also the real life historical events of what happened in Strasbourg. And basically, if you don't know what happened in Strasbourg, just randomly, I think in the 16th century, a bunch of people started dancing and they could not stop, and a lot of them danced until they died. And you can totally Google it. It's a really, really interesting story. But I loved that Anna Marie like decided to combine these two things, something that was fictional and something that actually happened. And it worked so perfectly in this book. And this book totally made me realize that I love books that have 2 different timelines, especially if the different timelines are like one's historical and one's like modern and actually happening like right then. So I really enjoyed that, and I think that it also kind of helped that I recently read The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab, and that also has like a historical timeline and a modern timeline. So, you know, I think that I want to find more books with that aspect in them because it just works for me. It's just so perfect. And I also love that there's like a little bit of like a hint of magic in it as well. It just like hit every single target on, you know, like my list of things that I love. So it just totally worked for me. I loved this book so much. The audiobook was amazing. Like, it was beautifully done, and you could really tell that they really put a lot of effort into this book. You could tell that they did a lot of like historical research. It was just done so beautifully, and I 100% recommend it. I've never read an Anna Marie McLemore book before, but now I want to read like all of their books. Like, I just need all of them. So the next book that I read for the Latinx Book Bingo Readathon was Cemetery Boys by Aiden Thomas, and this book just recently came out and I bought it and I absolutely loved it. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. I thought it was an amazing debut novel. It was just so much fun, and I loved the characters so much. It kind of reminded me a little bit of like Undead Girl Gang. I think I will say though that this book was less funny than Undead Girl Gang, but I enjoyed them both equally. So this book follows a trans main character, and he accidentally brings back a ghost from the afterlife, and he kind of becomes responsible for him. And him and his friend are actually in the middle of trying to find someone else, like a different ghost, and figure out what happened to them. So it's just like a lot of, you know, really fun like ghost adventures. So I just really enjoyed this book. I thought it was so much fun to read, and I just had such a good time. And like I said, the characters were amazing. Like, literally, I really enjoyed the characterization. They were all so distinct, and they all had these really great personalities. And I really loved Yadriel as our main character. I thought he was so fantastic, and I loved his perspective. And then I also loved Julian as a love interest. I thought he was really funny, and I liked the focus on family. I love family dynamics in my books, and I just found it to be really intriguing. So I cannot wait for the next book that Aiden Thomas comes out with. I think it's going to be even better than this one. So, you know, definitely an author that I'm going to watch. The next book I read is definitely my favorite out of any of them that I read this month, and that is Incendiary by Sabrina Karina. And like I said, she does not disappoint. She never disappoints. She never misses. She is always hitting that mark, and it's perfect. Like, literally, I don't know how more people aren't reading this book. It's fan-freaking-tastic. Like, just, I can't even express to you how perfect this book is. It just was everything I could have ever asked for. It was so good. You know, the world building was amazing. The magic system was amazing. I really loved, you know, these complicated relationships that were happening within this novel. Everything worked, and it worked perfectly. So basically, this book is about Renata, and as a child, she used to work for the king, and she has these special powers where she is able to steal people's memories, and she can steal enough memories to the point where someone basically becomes a shell of a person, where they don't have any thoughts or any memories or anything, and they can't function. So it's a really good form of punishment that the king used. And when she's about 8 years old, she's taken away from the palace, and she joins this group of other magic users. They're called the Moria, and they have other different powers. You know, some people can take memories, other people can influence emotions, other people can create these illusions. So there's a lot of different kinds of powers in this world and in this book. And basically what happens is that Renata has to go back to the palace and kind of pretend to like be helpful to the king and basically just infiltrate the palace. And I loved this book. If you follow me on Twitter, you probably saw a lot of my updates for this book specifically, and specifically about Prince Castian. I loved him as a character. He was so interesting, and he had some of like the best dialogue in this entire book. Like, the dialogue in general was like perfect, amazing. But Prince Castian's dialogue was on another freaking level. It was so good. It was sharp. Oh my god, like literally so many tabs were purple because of him. And I really loved it because right off the bat, like literally in the preface, we get to meet him, and he is just serving everything. I love him to death. He is perfect. And I also mentioned a couple times that, like, if you like Kylo Ren, if you like Reylo, you might really enjoy this book, and that's all I'm gonna say about it. That's all I'm gonna say. Just read this book. It's so good. Just, it's so good. And if you don't watch Star Wars and you don't really know what I'm talking about, just like, if you, this is controversial, but if you like the Darkling and you want him done a little bit better, read this book. Read this book. It's so good. And the last book that I read in the month of September was Annalie in Real Life by Janelle Milanes, and this was actually a reread for me. I first read this 2 years ago during the Latinx Book Bingo Readathon when like it first started, and I loved it this time around just as much. I gave it a 5 out of 5 stars. It's one of my favorite contemporaries, and I really, really love it. I feel like it does the fake dating trope so well, and the ending is so incredible. It's just like such a different kind of ending for a YA contemporary. I definitely wouldn't call this a YA romance because it doesn't necessarily have the happily ever after that most romances have, but I think it does kind of have. Well, I don't know. It's a happy ending. And basically this is about Annalie, and she is in high school, and she likes to play this role play video game online, and she has a friend there that she talks to and kind of has a crush on. Also, her mother died of cancer, I think over a year ago, and since then her father has actually met somebody else and they're gonna get engaged, and that other woman has a young daughter. So there's a lot of like changes happening in Annalie's life. And one day the most popular guy in school kind of comes to her and is like, hey, I want to make my girlfriend jealous. Do you want to be in a fake relationship? And it happens, and I really love it. It's just so good. The first time that I read this book, I read it in one sitting, and it was just like, it flew by. It was amazing. It was just such a great contemporary, and I feel like it really worked on so many different levels. Annalie is kind of an unlikable main character. She tends to say a lot of the wrong things. She isn't super happy all the time, and I feel like this really demonstrated that kind of character really well in this novel. So I feel like if you liked To All the Boys I Loved Before, or if you liked the concept but didn't necessarily like Lara Jean as a main character, you might like this book a little bit better because Annalie is very different than Lara Jean. So, you know, maybe you might want to give this book a try if you didn't really like To All the Boys I Loved Before. I think it's just so good. I really enjoyed it. I do wish that it had a sequel though, because I want to see like more of where these characters end up, but it's okay. I can totally deal with it being a standalone. Okay, so those are all the books that I read in September. I really loved everything I read. I just feel like I had such a great reading month. You know, at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter how many books I read. It just kind of matters to me if I liked those books and if I had an enjoyable experience. That's like the most important thing to me. So, you know, having, you know, a month where I read 3 5-star books and 1 4-star, it's just like, that's perfect. That's amazing. Okay, so I kind of have a really ambitious October TBR, but it's only because I am in such a huge reading mood at the moment. I just want to like blow through all of my books right now. So what I'm currently reading, I started it yesterday. It's Mexican Gothic by Silvia Moreno Garcia, and I started this yesterday. Like I said, I am currently only 20 pages into it, but it's not a super long book, and it's definitely going a little bit slower in the beginning, but it's kind of because I'm trying to get used to the writing style. I really like the writing style, but it's definitely more adult literature than I'm like typically used to reading. As you can see from the books that I read this month, I'm like always a YA reader basically, but I am really enjoying it, and I think that this is going to be a book that ends up being like a new favorite. I can already feel it. I am nervous though. Like before I started it yesterday, I was like getting a little anxious, being like, is it gonna be scary? Is it gonna be scary? I am like not a horror person. I don't watch horror movies. I don't read horror books. I just can't do it constantly, but I'm really excited. I really hope I like this book. So far, so good. The next book is also from my Latinx Book Bingo Readathon TBR, because it does go into October 15th. So Sabrina Karina, and I am super excited about these short stories. You know, it's a really short book in general, but I'm not a huge short story reader, so I'm a little nervous, but I think I'm really gonna like it because so many people, whenever I talk about this book, are like, oh my gosh, I really loved it, or I'm so excited to read it as well. So I think I'm going to like it. This short story collection mainly focuses on Indigenous Latinx women, and that is super exciting, as also I am an Indigenous Latinx woman. So I think I'm really going to enjoy this book, and it'll be nice to have that representation. The next book that was also on my TBR I'm going to read is Nocturna by Nora Motein, and I'm really excited about this book as well. I kind of wanted to pick a couple of the books for my TBR. I still have a few over there that I like don't know if I'm gonna get to, but I wanted to at least give myself a couple more books just so I can, you know, kind of round it out. But I've already read 4 Latinx books anyway for this readathon, so I'm not doing so bad. Anyway, this is a fantasy book. I feel like I've explained what it's about before. So this book is about Finn, and she is a shapeshifter, face shifter, and she ends up getting caught, and she has to go on this mission to steal this treasure, or she gets her magic taken away from her forever. So I think that that's a super intriguing plot. I love books where like you have to like go find the treasure, or you're like on this mission or something. I find that so intriguing. I just love that premise. So I'm really excited about this book as well. And I do remember that when I bought this book, I was actually with my mom at the bookstore. I picked it up and I'm like, I'm pretty sure that this is fantasy. And she read the, you know, the inside flap, and she's like, yep, that's fantasy. This is a book for you. And I'm like, okay, great. So I'm really excited to read this. You know, according to my mother, who has not read this book yet, it's the perfect book for me. Okay, on to the books that are not on my Latinx TBR. I have a couple of them here. These are basically just like October-y themed books. So the first one I want to talk about is Home Before Dark by Riley Sager. I want to read this book mainly because it reminds me of one of my favorite movies, and actually one of my only favorite scary movies of all time, and that is the Amityville Horror. I love that movie so much. I've loved it ever since I was a kid, and I was always really intrigued by like the background story and how like it was pushed as something that was real and then like was actually not real. I think that that's so intriguing. I just love it. And I love the movie. It's so like kind of scary but also not scary at all. And this book I've heard is very, very similar to the Amityville Horror, so that is super exciting for me. I've never read anything by Riley Sager. I've never read anything really in this genre. I just, you know, it's very outside of my comfort zone, but I'm very excited. And I think I'm gonna like it. I don't know, I've heard really good things about Riley Sager. I actually haven't heard very many things about this book specifically, but I'm hoping that it's gonna be good. You know, please don't let me down. I'm excited. So the next book that I have on this TBR is another one that's outside of my comfort zone, and that is The Turn of the Key by Ruth Ware. I'm so sorry you can hear my iPad dinging in the background. I think that kind of, you know, goes well into this book because I've heard that this book is similar to a Disney Channel original movie called Smart House, and that was one of my favorites as a kid. It's definitely like kind of like a creepy, weird, you know, premise of like this very highly intelligent and like really technologically advanced house, and I think that that's really interesting. I would tell you what this book is about, like specifically, but there's no synopsis anywhere on this book at all. Like I literally looked through all the pages. I will read one of the blurbs, however, and this says, let's just say that if you've got an Echo, you're going to unplug it as soon as you finish this book. What Ware does beautifully is infuse The Turn of the Key with a creepy Gothic sensibility. For all of the novel's contemporary touches, particularly the house's malevolent smart technology, which is very similar to Smart House, she has delivered an old-fashioned horror story, peopled by children with eyes full of malice, a dour housekeeper straight out of Rebecca, and an inscrutable handyman. And that's from the New York Times book review, so that's gonna be my synopsis for this book. Basically, it's Smart House, so that's all I want to know. That's all I need to know. I'm very excited about this book. Also, I've never read a Ruth Ware book before. And I also have another one that's up on my shelves, but I think I'm going to read one by one during either December or January. The next book that I have on my TBR, I told you it's an ambitious TBR, is Truly Devious by Maureen Johnston. And I have been wanting to read this book for a really long time. I did start the audiobook a couple of months ago, but I never finished it because I was just like, I think I only got like 2 chapters in, and I was already like, I need to read this physically. It's not gonna happen as an audiobook. So I have it physically. I'm so excited. Look at this gorgeous cover. It's beautiful. I can see it in the screen and it looks gorgeous. So this one I'm gonna completely butcher if I try to do it from memory. So we're going to just read the back. It says, Ellingham Academy is a famous private school in Vermont, founded by an early 20th century tycoon for the best and brightest students around. When Ellingham's wife and daughter were kidnapped, the only clue was a mocking riddle listing methods of murder, signed with a frightening pseudonym, Truly Devious. Their disappearance became one of the great unsolved crimes in history. Many years later, true crime aficionado Stevie Bell is set to begin her first year at the academy, and she is determined to solve this cold case. That is, she will solve it when she gets a grip on her demanding new school life and her housemates, the inventor, the novelist, the actor, the artist, and the jokester. But Truly Devious makes a surprise return. The past has crawled out of its grave and someone has gotten away with murder. So, I'm very excited about this book. I just love this premise. I love this idea. And I love a good murder mystery. I think that those are super fun. Not as scary as like other thrillers and horror novels, just those give me anxiety. But this seems like fun. This seems like good, you know, murder mystery fun. And the very last book on my TBR is also one that I started as an audiobook and then was like, nope, I gotta read the physical. And that is House of Furies by Madeline Rue. And I have to say that when this book first came out, every time I would pass it, like in Walmart or Target or Barnes & Noble or wherever, I always, like for a split second, would think it said House of Furries. I just needed to add that tidbit in there because I still look at it and I'm like, House of what? House of what? So yeah, no, it's House of Furies, just one R, I promise. It's not furries. So basically this is a gothic horror series, and I think this is also one I might need to read the back to like explain the premise to you guys. This says Louisa Ditton has nowhere to go. When she is offered employment as a maid at a boarding house, Louisa thinks she has been saved. But soon after her arrival at Cold Thistle House, Louisa realizes that the house's mysterious owner, Mr. Morningside, is providing more than just lodging for his guest. In fact, Mr. Morningside and his unusual staff are executing their own brand of dark justice on those who are past being saved. Including a charismatic young man Louisa is determined to prove innocent. So I think that's super exciting. I think, get pretty far into this book, actually, surprisingly. It might have been about halfway through, but that was, I think, a little over a year ago. So I definitely need to just like reread the beginning of this novel. I'm super excited for it though, because I remember the writing was absolutely gorgeous. I remember really liking Louisa as a main character, so I think this will definitely be a book that I end up liking. And the good thing is that if I do end up liking this book, I already have the sequel and the third book, the last one, already in hand. So, you know, it'll be a really fun little series to just like kind of marathon. Alright, so that was my wrap up. That was my TBR that went on for literally 30 minutes. So I'll have a lot of editing to do. But down below in the comments, let me know what you guys read in September, what you guys liked, what you guys didn't like, and then let me know what you're planning on reading in October, because I'm going to be very intrigued. I'm not a huge Halloween fan. However, I'm kind of warming up to it this year. I'm like in the Halloween mood, I'm in the fall mood and the aesthetic, so I definitely want to know what you guys are going to be reading for Halloween. So if you enjoyed this video, go ahead and give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. Also go ahead and follow me on Instagram, Twitter, and Goodreads, and I will see you all in my next video. Bye! Ooh, I thought it'd be me and you. Oh.